There's a line in Alcoholics Anonymous. It's popular in Alcoholics Anonymous. Don't compare your insides to other people's outsides. The same point. And I kind of said the 21st century big data version of that is don't compare your Google searches to other people's Instagram posts.
That's one of the best pieces of advice you can get in this sometimes overwhelming, hyper-comparative social media world. It may be difficult to pull back, to resist, to take a breath, but we hope you will sit back and give that one some real consideration. Stop comparing your insides to other people's outsides. They are not the same.
We are all individuals. We all have unique talents and abilities. We all come from different contexts. To compare me to yours without knowing really what your context is a recipe for disaster. Just keep in mind that we are all human. And with that, we want to welcome you to Behavioral Grooves. My name is Kurt Nelson.
And I'm Tim Houlihan. In this episode, Kurt and I are grooving on the very topic that you just heard, Seth Stephens-Davidowitz's observation that our public and private personas are very, very different. Seth is the author of Everybody Lies, and we hope you check out the previous episode where you can hear the complete interview with him.
Here in our grooving session, Tim and I will groove on what we learned from our discussion with Seth, have a free-flowing conversation, and talk about whatever else comes into our Everybody Lies, but Tim and Kurt's brains.
I like that. I love that. I think that that's an important foundation to lay, that everybody lies.
Yes, that we are the only two honest people in the entire world, and that everybody else is a lying, piece of shit. There you go. No, that's not it at all. We know that.
What? You just said it. That's truth. Yeah.
And that was a lie, Tim. We do lie. You and I both lie. Everybody lies. And sometimes we lie and we don't even realize we're lying. It's one of those factors, I think, that is just crazy when you think about it.
Yeah, I think you're right. And psychologists have known this for a while, that way we answer surveys doesn't always line up with our behavior. Right. Duh.
That's the understatement of the year right there.
Yeah.
How we answer surveys doesn't line up with our behavior. Well, we know that. We know there's a certain amount of falsification and, trying to understand what is the intent of the survey, or what do people want from that survey, particularly as we're thinking about it from an organizational perspective, surveying your employees, surveying your consumers. They don't always know. And so they have to make some idea up and kind of rationalize what is that appropriate thing. Yeah. And B, sometimes they just don't want to share some of that stuff because, it might make them look bad. And even if it's anonymous, they're not going to necessarily believe that because, hey, everybody lies, and you might be lying about if this is an anonymous survey or not.
Well, and the Google data, the Spotify data, those are observed behavioral pieces of data. A bunch of years ago, I did some work with Maytag, and it was really interesting. They were introducing these very new high image looking washers and dryers, clothes washers and clothing dryers. Very stylish, and they were much more expensive than the other ones. Of course, they did this standard focus groups and asked people what they thought, and of course, people are like, "No, they're just way too expensive." And I don't care what my clothes washer looks like. It's in the basement. It doesn't matter what it looks like. And so then they said, well, let's place a couple dozen of these in people's homes and see what happens. And then they went back and talked to those people where they were placed, and they said, oh man, this is the best thing ever, because I get to call my neighbors and they come over and I get to show them these super cool looking clothes washers and dryers. And it became a status thing. Like, I've got this really gorgeous looking thing. Like, it doesn't really matter, but they made it a big deal. So
it's interesting because just washers and dryers brings back this idea. So we did a program one time where we offered a series of 8 or 9 different awards for people who won this big incentive, right? They were a couple $1,000s in different pieces. And in those, we had a washer and dryer, a high-end washer and dryer.
Oh, that was right. That was an award?
One of the awards. And the director of incentive comp who was running this every year, when we ran this for multiple years, has begun, why do we have that in there? Who would want that? We're going, it's the number one thing that people pick out of all. There was trips, there was, TVs. No, they picked the high-end washer and dryer. It was like always number one or two every year.
Because it was an indulgence.
It wasn't, because again, if I'm going to go out and purchase a washer and dryer, I'm going to feel, hey, I can't spend $1,200 on the washer and another $1,300 on this fancy dryer. But hey, if it's an award, I'll take it. So again, we don't even, we can't assume we know things about what people are going to do. And if you surveyed people on that, I bet they would have said, nope, don't put a washer and dryer in there. But that's what they wanted. They were lying to themselves even. And that's a key piece of this. And this is an interesting part. So again, I like this concept of using Google, Spotify, these actual behavioral aspects in order to look at people's real behavior versus their stated behaviors. And sometimes I think that we don't even necessarily know what it is. And so I think in Google, we trust Google. So we're exploring ideas and we're looking at things and we're trying to figure things out. And we don't want to ever let other people know that about us, that we're unsure and maybe looking at things, or particularly if anything might have a negative, light that gets shined on us. That would not be a good thing.
So I have two questions for you. One is, to what degree does context matter for this particular aspect of lying? Like, are we more willing to lie, and why are we more willing to lie in some contexts than in others? And the second is back to our conversation with Shankar Vedantam. To what degree are these things that Seth calls lies sort of useful delusions for us?
No.
To what degree is it possible that they might actually be kind of helping us just get along?
I'll answer the second question first because I'm not sure about the context piece, so I'll have to think about that while I'm talking. Okay. But I think there is an aspect of these useful delusions that we put a persona out there because we think that is going to generate positive impact for us, right? The idea that we kind of put out the Facebook or Instagram life that we live, that the pictures that we put out there are on our vacation, or when our kid wins an award, or when you're doing something fun. We don't put the pictures of the shitty, crappy things that are going on in our life, but that's because we need to project. We want to project that we are successful, because we know that when we project that success may come back to us. Right. And we don't want to have people think poorly of us. And we want people, we like that esteem aspect that comes with it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have nothing to add to that. I think that that's a great explanation. So
the context piece, though, like context of lying. And, we talked with Kelly Paxton, which isn't necessarily apples to apples in this, but Kelly was talking about embezzlement and talking about context, and how the context of embezzlement, that people are more likely to embezzle within certain contexts. And I think that same thing can be applied to lying. And that is, we're going to lie to save face more often than not, right? It's more likely to lie if we are trying to save face than if we were in a situation where we didn't. I think those are types of contexts that are going to be important when we think about this.
Maybe a subset of the context discussion is the messenger and the message. Like how, right? I think back to our discussion with Steve Martin and Joe Marks when it comes to how comfortable we are with living with lies from other people, from messengers who we have something that we want from them. And we're willing to suppress our judgment about the lie in exchange for something else.
And we may even repeat their lies because that gains some. So we know that there is a lie going on, or at least we don't, as you said, maybe we don't explore it. We don't necessarily know if it's a lie or not, but we don't even take the effort to look at that because we want to be part of this team, of this tribe, and make sure that we have that, we signal to the other people, other members of this group, that we are part of the in-group, and that thus we are towing to the line that the group states, even if that is lying, even if that has been shown to be a lie, then you can justify it. That's the interesting piece from, I think, the Steve and Joe's work, is that even when it's, they definitely lied, but I'm okay with that because, and there's always that because they move forward our agenda, because it wasn't that big of a deal, because of X. You always make an excuse on the back end when that messenger that you put up on that pedestal lies. And I think that's an interesting concept, because does that apply to us as well? Like, can we justify our lies to others because that it forwarded my agenda? Mm-hmm. It wasn't that big of a lie. It didn't hurt anybody. It was, you can always do the because part of that. And I think that's key.
It could be the macho male college student that tells his friends, sure, I had to buy, 6 dozen condoms last week, because I've been so sexually active. Yeah.
Oh, yes. That was one of the best things that Seth brought up is this, what was it? The state that they bought 1.6 billion condoms, women 1.1 billion. But when you look at the actual sales, it's 600 million. So, all right, multiply the time of that we're sexual aspects by 3 for those men. That's how it. Which is probably pretty accurate, right?
Especially in Olympic villages. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the idea that where you're born basically influences your entire life.
Which is sad, right? It really is a sad statement, but the reality of it is very, very true. This idea that, hey, your zip code is going to impact the zip code that where you are born and live, right, is going to impact your outcome in life, and it's just quantifiably demonstrated. And it's hard for people. It would be you'd have to be lying if you were saying, well, that's not true, because of the data that's there.
Yeah, I wanted to call attention to some work done by Melody Goodman. She is a professor of public health at Washington University in St. Louis. In 2014, she went back and looked at these adjacent neighborhoods, adjacent zip codes in the city of St. Louis, literally separated by a street. So, one side of the street was one zip code, the other side of the street was another zip code. And in one of those zip codes, 99% of the people that live there are Black, and only 5% have bachelor's degrees. And in the adjacent zip code, only 5% are Black, and 67% of those people have bachelor's degrees. And you think about the impact that that's going to have on your entire life. And she extrapolates it into public health, because the cost of healthcare for those people, what they consume in healthcare across their lives, is significantly greater in the mostly Black neighborhood. And you think that's a real cost to society. It's a real cost to our entire insurance system and medical system.
Well, we talked with Johannes
Haushofer.
Haushofer, thank you. And about, just this poverty aspect and how poverty creates all of these negative impacts. And again, you look at zip codes and you look at the various different, even separated by a street, I can probably guarantee that the average income of those two different areas were vastly different. I mean, if you look at 5% bachelor degrees versus 67%, you can probably extrapolate out who's going to be the richer neighborhood. And so again, the aspect of what that does to our cognition, what that does to our different pieces and various different aspects of it. So I think the interesting piece here is that Seth even talked about is, look, who you surround your kids with. So not even just you and your parenting style. So you can do the best job that you can, but you need to make sure that the people that you're hanging out with, which I think is part of this zip code aspect. Yep. So look, if you're in one of those zip codes, look for ways to bring in people into your kids' lives that are outside of that zip code, that are successful, particularly. And he talked about girls who, if they see role models, these women who are successful in science or engineering, any of those STEM areas, that aspect of having those friends is significantly correlated with the likelihood of those girls going into those areas further on, which, if you think about it, is just crazy, but it makes sense.
Absolutely. Again, I've got nothing to add to that except a big, oh my gosh, we really need to do a better job of parenting with this frame. And I think that that's a great opportunity as parents to walk away with that.
And I think, like I mentioned in the episode, I'm sorry, but you're just not coming over anymore, Tim, because I need to set a good example for my kids. I'm sorry.
I think you're right. I totally support it. I will absolutely be a bad influence. I mean, a musician.
Now we can bring your wife over all the time, so maybe you get to come over because you're kind of associated with her. But I'll put you out in the garage and
I won't see your children.
No, you'll be like, oh no, Tim's over there. He's doing something out there outside. Don't go out.
I totally support that.
No,
they don't need an influence from a ne'er-do-well musician. That's for sure.
Oh, but I thought that was really fascinating. It's so again, from an application perspective. So how do we do this? How do we take this information that is really sad from its perspective, and what can we do about it? So I think we can look at things of how do we eliminate some of that poverty and making sure that we have policies in place that help in doing this. And we talked a little bit about UBI and some of the past episodes and various aspects of that. But I think there's also this aspect of, all right, if you are in a situation and you know that, what can you do to get your kids to have role models in their lives that maybe are what you want them to ascribe to? This idea that they can become somebody. And so you got to put those people in their lives. And if you do that, they're more likely to believe that. And it's not just you, it's the people that you surround yourself with.
Which might cause you to think about our conversation with John Levy, and the kind of influence that you want to have in your life might not be about, how you can advance your own career, but how you can connect your kids with people who will be good role models.
Well, and for those of us who have that privilege, right? We are probably everybody who's listening to this podcast, maybe not everybody, but most people who are listening to this podcast are probably in one of the more privileged zip codes. And so what can you do to reach out to make that happen? As one of my friends said, look, we have to do more. We have to make a concerted effort to go into these neighborhoods that are, more financially distressed or socially, inactive, and just frequent them. Go in and go to the restaurants there, go to the shop at those stores, make yourself present, get to know the people that are in those areas. It shouldn't be up to them. It should be up to us. Remember Dolly Chug, who talked about, we have the tailwind behind us. And you know what? It would be nice to be able to get the tailwind behind everybody. So
well said. Well said. We did talk a lot about dating with Seth. And so I think that it's worth at least touching on this. Not, you and I aren't in the dating pool, so that's not super relevant, but
thank God.
But I will say, yeah, no kidding. But I will say this, that when he said, here's the things that you can do to improve your likelihood of having a good relationship. He said, cast a wide net, don't overemphasize the shiny traits, look for connections, especially ones that aren't obvious. I really love that one. And then don't underrate our psychological traits, and I thought, wow, actually that feels like a really good mindset to have when it comes to finding your groove, like living your life.
I think you are nailing it. That is absolutely true, right? Cast a wide net. Who are you interacting with? Who are the people that you associate yourself with? Cast a wide net in the books that you read, in the television stations that you watch, in the types of information that you gather. And don't just look at what's popular, that shiny trait aspect of it. I think is again, those are fantastic things.
And look for the connections that aren't always so obvious. I think that this is a really tricky one and a really cool one. When he was talking about this, it got me thinking about how I got connected with my wife, with Katie. And in fact, she and I talked about it last night. This idea that there are aspects about our relationship that really, really work, that really cement us, that aren't just on the surface, that are things that as we were getting to know each other, we saw these deeper connections that are more meaningful. And I think that this is something that I'd like to replicate in other aspects of my life. I mean, certainly, and Kurt, you can speak to this for yourself, but the connections that you and I had were for years, like we were colleagues, working together. It was easy, great working together. But then, we started doing some stuff that was more closely associated, where we really had to partner up on stuff. And then, and that kind of led to, wait a minute, we have a deeper love for behavioral science than the average bear. Right. And that really helped. Yeah. So I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah. I mean, it was really cool. I used to respect you, and then I got to know you better. And then it was,
that went out the window.
Joking. That's, guys, people don't write in. I know I'm kind of mean to Tim, but he knows it's in love and jest and the different pieces. Totally. But you bring up a really good point, right? What are those unique aspects, those ties that keep us together that might not be so apparent? I think also the interesting piece about that, look for especially the non-obvious connections, can be thinking about who are the people that we want in our lives. And we always think, I want to have that powerful person or that author or whatever it would be. It's kind of going back to some of the John Levy things that we've talked about. And you know what? Maybe some of the connections are more people that we just enjoy hanging out with, that make us have a better perspective on life. Again, thinking about what are the connections that I can make into some of those neighborhoods that are not in my zip code, that are in a less desirable zip code. And can I go out there and make a difference in other people's lives?
Absolutely.
And the last piece, though, that you talked about there was the psychological traits. And I think that's really key, right? We overlook how good relationships are, and particularly in the dating piece, because you're looking at all of those outward, how much do they make? What's their job? How well do they look? How attractive are they? What kind of car they drive? All that outward stuff. But it's really that stuff, at least after 20 plus years of marriage, that goes out the door. And It really is the things about who that person is and their mindset and how they show up and how you show up with them. Go back to what was the Jerry Maguire thing, you complete me, or whatever that silly line was. But there is something to that, right? It's like, if you are psychologically compatible, there's some positives to that, and take a look for that. Make sure that you're trying to do that, not just in your dating scene, but in the people that you hang out with.
And your business relationships as well. Okay. Lastly, we could just talk a little bit about music, because it was pretty damn fun to talk about this. I mean, Seth's stuff certainly reinforced a lot of work that we've already talked about. Dan Levitin's work on This Is Your Brain on Music. We know that period from a neuroscience perspective is when those ages just absorb new music, and those imprints last forever. And I love that. And I love that we have additional data that reinforces that now from Spotify.
Yeah, that was fascinating, right? What was it that women, typically it's that around 13 years of age, and boys it's around 14, obviously showing how much women, mature sooner than men do, still to this day. But the idea that I always find interesting about this is, okay, so these are averages, and these are facets that go into this. But what are the exceptions? And are there rules around these exceptions? And that was some of the research I would love to see
explored,
be done. I don't know if it's been done, but if it could be explored, that would be great. Like, I think, Seth himself in one of his articles talked about, well, why do I like Bob Dylan and these other
Cohen,
Leonard Cohen,
right?
Bruce Springsteen, and Bruce Springsteen, they're not in my age group that I was listening to at those times, but those are my favorites. And I would probably say I'm the same way. I don't, yes, when I was 14 years old, I was listening to AC/DC and, some of the other heavy metal rock bands that I'll listen to them occasionally, but they're not top on my playlist anymore. And
good.
Yeah. I wasn't listening at 14. I wasn't listening to the 80s alt rock or the more folky stuff that I'm listening to, that I still listen to.
I think that's interesting.
Again, I wonder if there's personality aspects of that. I wonder if there are facets of what was going on in your life in those times, and what were the more vivid areas of your memory of what childhood was. Is childhood around, or that teenage kind of, maybe it just means I matured later.
That assumes that you've matured.
Which is a big assumption. I will grant you that. It's a big assumption. There you go.
I wanted to point out that on our new website, we have a sort of a database of all of the music that all of our guests have talked about, which is kind of cool. And I saw that 9 of our guests have made mention of Hamilton, of the Hamilton soundtrack. That's a lot. I think that's kind of cool, actually.
Yeah. What is that? Like 3% of our guests?
Yeah, I know, but still, we asked them about what's on their playlist, and there's a lot of artists out there. There's a lot of music out there, and to think that Hamilton came up that much, I thought was a lot.
I think you're absolutely right. Right? It's not one that you would have necessarily
wouldn't have guessed it,
predicted, right? So if we would have done a survey in advance of what do you think will be, what artists or musical influences are going to show up, Hamilton probably would not have been one that we would have guessed, which is interesting. So what is it about Hamilton that does that, right? What is the Hamilton influence on people? I don't know. It's fascinating.
Before we end our discussion on music, I just want to double down on our shout out to Elizabeth Kim, our old pal who we haven't talked to in a while. And we've got to get her on the show because I can imagine that she's got tons of insights from Spotify, and we need to talk to her. So
yes,
thank you to Elizabeth for supporting Seth in getting the data that helped him come up with this stuff.
Fantastic. So shall we wrap it up?
Yeah, that actually sounds good. There's probably 1,000 things more that we could talk about, but we can leave those chords for another song.
Chords for another song. Nicely played, Mr. Tim. Nicely played. And to our listeners, thanks very much for sitting in on our grooving episode and for our conversation with Seth. We hope our conversation brought some fresh light to the ways that you might be thinking about how you frame your public and personal life and other aspects.
Yeah. And I can't help but doing a little promo here for our next episode, Kurt, because I want to let you know, and I'm just going to tell you right now, I'm going to use the words very and special more times than you can bear. Okay. Because I just want to say that what's coming up next week is a very special episode with a very special guest who did some very special psychological research 50 years ago.
Okay, 50 years ago? Oh my gosh. Okay, so Tim, what was so special about this 50-year-old research that seems super old, like almost as old as me? Come on.
Oh, that was just so bad. That was just so bad. In fact, I'm just going to let you just go ahead and explain it. You're so very special. You just go ahead and tell the listeners.
All right. So excellent. So we're talking about the famous Stanford prison experiments that started 50 years ago, actually next week. So that was when the experiments went. So if you haven't heard of those, you probably read about them in Psych 101. They are just across the board. And of course, we're talking with Professor Philip Zimbardo, who designed and executed these highly controversial experiments. And they've even gotten more controversial as time has gone on. It's really amazing that he did them and the things that he learned about power and position, and that we're still studying those aspects today and still having kind of different perspectives on this. And what does the context of how that work impact the world of power and abuse and a variety of other things. So in our next episode, we're going to share our conversation with Professor Zimbardo, or Dr. Z, as he told us to call him. And we'll be discussing his thoughts on the work that is now 50 years old. Isn't that kind of cool?
It really is. You won't want to miss out on the remarks from this amazing researcher. He's really quite amazing. But for now, thanks for listening, and we hope that this week you go out and find your groove.